Um, I'm going to give you, excuse me, Friday we are within 2 weeks of Election Day. So Friday we're going to look at some of the polling. You're going to have a number of things that you have to do online. And I got to tell you, we used to do it on paper. And there are now quite a few online sites that deal with things like etiology. And we're going to use those because they're a lot more fun than doing it the old way on paper. They're also updated. But I'm going to upload a number of things today and tomorrow for you guys to do, especially tomorrow. I hope the cart's in here, but if it isn't, you can still access things on your phones and things like that. But I've got a number of things for you to do tomorrow, and I may not be here Friday. I may be at a social studies thing Friday, but I'm not sure yet. Now, secondly, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch has, this is starting to leak out. The Michael Brown situation. This is starting to leak out, and one side is obviously the family side is rejecting any of the forensic evidence. And that's all it is. And you have to step back for a second, because Eric Holder, the Justice Department, the FBI came in and said, basically, we're going to take over the investigation. So yeah, they've been working with the St. Louis coroner, but honestly, the scenario that the family put forth isn't backed up by the forensics. The forensics is saying Michael Brown had gun residue on his hands. They're saying, well, that must have been painted on. I'm having, I know. And you would figure if you put the full expertise of the FBI on the case, I mean, how much expertise do they have? A lot. And I just want to see it all play out. But again, let the evidence speak. And right now, there are a number of people aren't happy with that. And I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say at this point. But I've always been, especially being in law and government, we go from the beginning talking about how you've got to let the evidence play out. You've got to take your feelings out of it, and just look at the rebuilding of the case based on the forensic evidence, not the anecdotal, not eyewitness evidence, which can be very misleading, as it's been proven time and time again. It's interesting. How many of you wound up looking at the article on American policing and the number of deaths that occur? Yeah. Was that an eye-opener? Yes and no. The expectation is, and a lot of people on the left use this, thousands and thousands of people are killed every year. The fact of the matter is it's under 500. But is there a racial component that is very difficult to explain? Yes, there is. Absolutely, there is. There is. Far more young black men are likely to be killed than any other grouping. On the other hand, it's not thousands and thousands. It's still not good, but let's at least get the numbers right. Let's at least get the numbers right. And it's not all white cops killing black. Like it's law enforcement can be anything. But again, as you get out of the cities, you're much more likely to look at law enforcement that is more white, simply because it's a weird dynamic, but that's the way it is. Yeah, Oscar.
I don't think it's they end up in such situations,
It's possible. It's possible. Anything's possible. And I think what also is taken out of the equation, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I got to talk to Mr. Johnson again about this, is that police are taught when they are in situations like that, you shoot to kill and you ask questions later on. And I don't think sometimes the public is really aware of that, Because I'll hear people say, well, they should have shot him in the knee or whatever. No, no, they're taught to shoot to kill in order to, yeah, that's the dynamic. Any cop is told to do that.
But I agree with what you say, because, you know, a lot of them aren't, and I don't want to mean like them, like, oh, those different people or those colored people. A lot of them are not really under circumstances or a personality that would give off, you know, a respectful person. Like, for example, Michael Brown, when he first got shot and blew up on the news, they pictured him as such an angel and successful black person when they showed a video of robbing a store and nearly getting into a fuss with the store owner. So.
And the coroner's report said he had a decent amount of pot in his system.
Yeah.
It's neither. I don't know how to get over the divide where you have at least a certain segment of the population, primarily black Americans, who don't trust law enforcement. And part of you says you can't blame them for feeling like that. And then the other part says, how do you then get around that? Because the very people that they don't have an affinity with are also the people that are charged with protecting them. And when you don't trust that, element in the community, how do you get around that? And I am totally, I don't know. But we have to get around it at some point.
They just try to put themselves in a different atmosphere than what they are.
It's possible. I don't know. Anyways, I wanted to bring that up because it's out there. This is now the third report that's been leaked. None of it is favorable to the family and to the narrative that the family has put out. The forensics is saying something else. And what I'm hearing, the chatter among a number of places, the Democratic Party is using the Ferguson case in the Georgia Senate race because it's so close. They want to get African American voters out. And I'm just thinking that is just so disrespectful of African American voters that if you play this card, they're going to turn out. And I would think that voters should be smarter than that. And I think they are smarter than that, to not be manipulated. But then, you know, both parties have done it in the past, but this is just so blatant in a case that had nationwide ramifications. It'd be like if last year's Trayvon Martin case had been occurring now rather than then. How would the parties approach that case? Saying that the Brown family isn't being, and how they can say that when the Justice Department or Eric Holder and the FBI is there, but they're using it as, well, see, you're not being treated equal, and so you got to stick with the Democrats. And there's a really good commercial out from I don't know if he's a state legislator or he's a leader in church leader in northern Louisiana. He's a black man, and he's saying, why do you just trot right up and basically vote Democrat? What have they ever done for you? You're the most reliable voters for the Democratic Party. What have they done for you? We have the highest amount of unemployment right now among any group, 14 to 15%. Just stop and think. But why would you use Ferguson?
You know, either way,
It's to me, it's
African Americans either vote for someone who will not support you or not support you at all. Like both parties are Democrats.
Well, and you're right. You're right from the perspective. Republicans should be talking about, hey, we think the economic policies have really screwed you. This is what we're going to do. But they're not talking about that either. Both neither party offers a vision of where they want to go. Except the Democrats want bigger government, Republicans want smaller government, but neither of them have. I mean, the Republicans certainly haven't practiced small government. Look what happened under Bush. Look what happened under Bush. If you're looking at libertarian or conservative principles, Bush is a huge disappointment. He's a huge disappointment because he talked the talk, but he didn't walk the walk. So let's look at political socialization. Switch here, figures. Just as I start to go here, the makes you who you are? Well, the family is the biggest and strongest factor in who you become as a person, as a voter. So generally what happens is the kids imitate their parents. And what's really weird, the dynamic, boys are a little bit more likely to follow the views of the mother, and the girls are a little bit more likely to follow the views of the father. It's a weird dynamic, but it is what it is. This is the most important factor in how you develop politically, the family. Now, it used to be, we would have a number of other things. I've actually got to move this around because media has become now number 2, where it used to be schools. But there is a correlation. If Ulysses' mom and dad is a Democrat, he's probably going to be a Democrat. That happened to me. My parents were, my dad was a DWP, Department of Water and Power. And so he came out of Kentucky. He was a lifelong Union Democrat. Though toward the end, before he died, he began to vote non-Democrat because he didn't like where the party was going. But that's typical. So there's less of a correlation, though, on these two issues. Civil liberties, your parents are much more likely to be anti-gay marriage than you are. Your parents are a little bit probably more likely to consider things through a racial prism than you guys are. You guys just really don't care for the most part. Gosh, that's really good. That's really, really good. There's nothing wrong with that.
We're more comfortable with.
Yeah, I mean, look at this school. It shouldn't be based on your interest. Shouldn't be based around race. It should be based on your interests.
Yeah.
And I see that more and more every year. Apparently, it's not like that at Quartz Hill, but that school across the valley sucks anyway. So, yeah. Somebody's going to download this, and they're going to talk about Quartz Hill being what they are. Now, it doesn't matter. Now, it does matter, perhaps, when you only have a single-parent household. But when you have two parents, it really doesn't matter. There's fairly equal influence by both parents. That's the data that we get. And the child usually associates their views with the parent that they're closest to. And then it's kind of simple. The family has the most influence on you. Okay, now, come on, you can do this. This was normally I had stuff in the background. I couldn't get the pictures to diffuse enough to where you could read the text. So it's really bare bones. Okay, schools. Schools are different. With preschools, you get ideas introduced to you for the first time about authority and rules. You've got to follow the rules. Ulysses, Logan, get in line, one and back of the other. You got touch Logan, touch Ulysses' back and be straight behind him. You've heard you guys heard all that, right? You guys heard all that. No, but you learn that either in preschool or in kindergarten. You learn to line up. You learn to salute the flag. You learn all of these rules. Yeah.
Don't you ever find it kind of ironic that the first 2 years of a kid's life, you teach them how to stand up and speak, but then the rest you teach them how to sit down and shut up?
And that's, well, and we've talked about that. We've talked about the fact that you guys don't discuss things, or you're afraid to discuss things because you're constantly told to shut up.
Yeah.
I'm just the opposite. I want, 100% participation when it comes to interesting things. And you guys, like I said, are the best first period class I've had in years. You guys at least, there's a number of things that you do.
Especially in the morning.
Now, that doesn't mean that you're any better or any worse than second period. Remember, I said that.
I don't remember hearing that.
Shut up, Fortenberry. You know that I treat second period. I treat second period just like I do first period because you sit through the first 10 minutes with your gaga eyes toward Miss Coleman.
Get ready.
You don't say like the exact same word every time.
what can I say? I'm a master of repeat, I guess. Okay, now, elementary school, ages 5 to 10. You get a concept of the government as an institution. Again, you might be introduced to the Constitution for the first time. You certainly get introduced to the flag. You start saying the Pledge of Allegiance. You have all those things that you do. It's inculcating those things that we believe in as a country. So what we're doing is we're indoctrinating you in the culture of the country. Equality, libertarianism, things like that. Entrepreneurship. We should be anyways. We also give, I think, yeah, Michael. You know what? I was trying to figure that one out. Oh, college students. That's what it is. College students. College students. Yeah. Because if you look at where it is, we're talking about college. I'm sitting there this morning, I'm like, what the heck is that? I abbreviate a lot of stuff. Now, here's the other thing. Yeah. It's a person who's on the left. You believe that government is benevolent and can do everything for you. You know, just the opposite of actually what you do think. Yeah. Okay, here's the other thing. This is where you learn that George Washington chopped down the cherry tree. You know, our leaders don't lie to us. We're indoctrinated with this mom and apple pie and the waving of the flag in this 5 to 10 year period. Then adolescence sets in. Excuse me. You know, if you're a guy, you start to discover girls for the first time, and you know, if you're a guy and a girl, you actually start to stink for the first time, but you start to look at the world differently because you're maturing. You're starting to change.
Like public introspection.
Yes. It's at this point, especially, this is that adolescence between the ages of 11 and 18. This is the point where, especially 16, 17, 18, you begin to identify with a political party. And you have the ability to think about politics as more of an abstract event. And you not only start to identify with a political party, but you start to look at the dynamics of philosophy. So you become a liberal or you become a conservative. Then, when you get to be in adulthood, this is where this college stuff comes in. If you graduate from high school and you leave home and you just get a job, generally your basic political beliefs don't change. But when you go to college, it does change. Part of the reason if you don't go to college, the reason it doesn't change is your priorities are different. You're interested in finding a job, and you're interested in your own welfare. If you're in college, you kind of delay that a little bit. And so it's this group that, in a lot of ways, and they're primarily male, not female, it's this group that is in that middle that kind of perpetuates the continuity of United States politics. Because when you go to college, you become more liberal, and then later on, as you get a brain, you become more conservative.
Okay. I think it's because, you'd be a liberal in college because of the financial assistance.
Yes. Especially with guys, as this middle part of the brain here fills in, the reasoning part and all of that, it's something that just makes sense. Where have I been the last 8 years since I've been in college? This doesn't make sense at all. And so colleges, though, are a little bit different. So you'll notice that we're in here. It's not my job to change your political orientation. It's not my job. It's my job to illuminate the different pathways you can take. Colleges, though, really do move you to the left. I've seen surveys, because most of you have to take social studies at college. 95% of professors are liberal or more, and 95% of them are Democrat. Now, how does that happen? I mean, I think there needs to be an affirmative action program for colleges for college professors who are conservative or moderate.
Or maybe that kind of tells us if really smart guys are mostly Democrats. Kind of get
Well, only if you're delusional.
Stats don't lie, Jones. Stats don't lie.
Here's why. The more you're protected by government, the more left you are. Isn't that weird? Why? Because you don't have to worry about the real world. So these people at college live in a void.
No, I think
They live in a vapid void.
Minorities have to worry about the real world, and somehow they're
Yes, but then they move back over to the right as they get older. There's no doubt. There is no doubt about that. We see that. We see the voting
I think the
patterns.
ones that succeed-
Except for black Americans since the Depression. Okay. Now if you go to Harvard or you go to MIT, you're going to be more liberal. If you're in social sciences, you're going to be more liberal than if you are in the natural or physical sciences. So there's some further breakdowns. But just be aware of those kind of changes that are going on. All right, now, religion. Religion. If you are Protestant, this is where the evangelicals come in. Evangelical Christians are most definitely conservative because of the moral issues. They're more right-wing because of those moral issues. And evangelicals are the most conservative of all on social issues. Oh, thank you. Now with Catholics it changes a little bit, and there's some reasons for that, but Catholics are on the move too. Catholics traditionally have been more liberal. Part of the reason for that is they were on the outside looking in so many ways, especially the Irish and then later on the Italians, who basically are Catholic. Now, though, there's a greater acceptance of Catholics, and they're more mainstream. And they have been traditionally Democratic voters until the last 10 to 12 years. They have moved to the right on social issues. And that has made them more Republican voters than Democratic voters. And it's issues like abortion that have moved Catholics to the right. And that's why I sometimes you see these left-wing commentators who really do think that Hispanics will vote in a Democratic bloc, and you've got to understand that Democratic policies really are, in a lot of ways, are the antithesis of how religious Catholic Hispanics think. But Catholics now have a greater inclusion. We especially see that. I mean, there used to be Catholic, just like there used to be Jewish, and to some extent black country clubs, because they weren't allowed in the Protestant mainline ones. So there was some separation. Now you don't really see that anymore. For Jews traditionally are liberal. I'm surprised that more Jewish support hasn't dissolved for the current administration based on their policies toward Israel. But the Democratic Party was the first ones to bring Jews into the fold, and Jews have been loyal Democratic voters since then, probably in that 70 to 80% range, not as high as black Americans in voting for the Democratic Party, except when there is a Republican moderate, because Jews are especially liberal on social issues. But Jews are also roiled by the fact that, especially in the outer two Jewish congregations, not the Orthodox, but the conservative and forgot what the more liberal one is. 50% of Jews marry outside their faith. So there's a number of issues that to deal with, but doesn't change their support for the Democratic Party. Again, it's monolithic, but there have been a number of Republican Jewish politicians, Jacob Javits and others, that have worked on this. Now, with race, we see, and I'm not sure what I was thinking when I put this one together. Like, 10 years ago. This is like the mid 2005 is where I took this from. I'm not quite sure what I was trying to get to, except that I think what I was trying to get to is how jumbled we've all come. The stereotypes are beginning to really break down, and I know that there's in last night's lecture there's a thing that kind of divides up by four groups: Asian Americans, Black Americans, White Americans, and Hispanic Americans. And my thought, what about like in suburbs like this, where 20 to 30% of the kids have 3 or 4 different influences? And where do they go? Which I think, and they're going to be a bigger and bigger group as we go along. And now do you include a box on all forms that just says American? Otherwise, you're checking 9 other boxes. Seriously, it's just dumb. It's dumb. You're American, so just check the American box.
But there's a difference between nationality and ethnicity.
Oh, certainly there is, but the way they do it is not the way to do it. All they're doing is trying to get statistical data.
It's just
And really does.
I don't see the big
But
deal on it.
oh, it is based on what government thinks is what your needs might be.
Oh, okay.
Based on, and I don't think that's a very good thing to do. But I could be wrong. Now we know that with race, whites are more conservative, they're more GOP. That is certainly, we've seen the change in the South occur in the last generation, or generation and a half. We see that change, for the most part, also come about in the West. But the West is more GOP, more libertarian. Blacks are more liberal, they're more democratic. 90% voting percentage for Democrats. It's almost in a lot of ways non-thinking for some groups. Jews voting Democrats, it's kind of non-thinking. I'm not quite sure why. I go all over the map. I think about what I'm going to do. I don't lockstep vote for one party. I can't. Hispanics, Mexican Americans, and Puerto Ricans are more liberal and Democrat, but that doesn't filter through to groups like Cubans, who are more conservative, more GOP. And again, we say Hispanic, but don't ever call a Cuban a Mexican or a Mexican a Cuban. Fighting words. Yeah, exactly. But see, that's the problem. That's the problem with multiculturalism. Because you focus on where you came from, not where you want to go. And that's why I hate multiculturalism. I love diversity, but I hate multiculturalism.
Multiculturalism creates racism.
That's true.
Not necessarily. It just creates division.
Because if you're more focused
Yeah,
on culture,
you know, it's-
then you're focusing on the difference in culture rather than
Exactly.
shared
That is the
culture.
problem. And you're not buying into the majority culture and changing it at the same time. It's, for instance, shh, guys, please. For instance, it's the number of people who come to the United States and for instance, think that they don't have to change. And we've seen, I think, 3 cases where Muslim girls have been murdered by their parents because the one in Toronto was extraordinary. The one in Toronto and I think the one in Arizona. The one in Toronto, she would dress extremely modest in the morning. She'd go down to the gas station, and she'd change so that she looked more like American girls and she would belong. When the parents got wind of it, the father and the brother murdered her because she was no longer following the dictum of the family. In Arizona, it was even worse. Either the father or the brother ran over the girl again and again, and the mother said that was the right thing to do.
Oh my God.
Yeah. You can't move to another country and expect to live in a void and see nothing change. And yet, you see that time and time again. If you're so concerned about not changing, then don't leave where you came from. Well, you know what? It was she came back to visit me last year. She's wearing her Navy uniform at the time, but she goes, she's talking to me the year before, and she goes, being a medical person has always been something that my family's done. And I said, so you don't want to be a doctor? And she goes, no, but my parents are saying you have to be a doctor. And she was Filipino, and Filipino American, and I said, so what's the problem? She says, I faint at the sight of blood. I went, yeah, that's a real problem. And I said, you're going to have to talk to especially her mom, who I think was a doctor. And I said, you're going to have to talk to her. And I said, this isn't going to happen. She says, you don't understand the family dynamic. And I said, I do understand the family dynamic. But I said, you have to look at it from the other perspective. Would I ever want you as my doctor? You're scared to death of blood. You'll faint before I faint. You know? She came in a uniform. Her parents just finally got wise. And she's in intelligence. She's doing a number of things that she wants to do, and she's loving life. But her senior year was just one of misery. She just walked in every day. It was like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. And see how that family dynamic works? Not just politically, but in so many ways. That family dynamic is huge. Now, Asian Americans are a little bit different. Now, you'll notice in the Bay Area, they are liberal, very liberal. But you know, in other places, not so much. And we know that, in particular, Japanese and Chinese American voters are more conservative than those of other Southeast Asian groups that have come in, Thais, Vietnamese, things like that. Let's see if I can get through this. I know. Income. Those with higher incomes are more conservative, more GOP. Those with lower incomes are more liberal and more Democrat. Gee, what a surprise, right? What a surprise. Opinion leaders. The mass media has a huge impact. Now, this is dated. Gosh, who even sees Rush Limbaugh or Howard Stern anymore? Because they're both on, well, Jon Stewart, Bill O'Reilly.
Have you ever seen
We're gonna stop here.
Did you ever see one episode where, like, there's been a number of times that this the latest